Welcome, everybody. I'm Michael Johnson. I'm here with Eric Enderton, and we're from the Academy Software Foundation as Asset Repository Working Group to give you an update on what we've been up to since last Open Source Day. So the first question, I guess, is why do we need an asset repository at the Academy Software Foundation? Well, I think as all of us in the industry know, there is a real lack of production grade assets out there. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. There's a lot of us work at studios that are vendors to someone else's story. It's not their IP, they can't share it. Even if it's their IP, it can be very, very complex. And on the other side of it, it can be very complex to take in an asset from some other place because you don't have sort of a clear line there. So, we really think the community needs this repository of production grade assets, and we need it for a bunch of different reasons. One of them is just being able to have a grounded discussion in our space about what are the things that people are dealing with in terms of data sets day to day. Also to help researchers who are coming up with new renderers or new approaches to the problems that we deal with to develop new algorithms to make sure that the data sets that they're designing for are credible and current. Also, a lot of people in the ASWF community write commercial software or internal studio software, and this is key to understanding the performance metrics of it. And finally, to sort of help push the hardware forward, a lot of us use very specialized hardware, and we need to be able to make sure that the people who are designing and building that hardware are building it at the scale that matters for us. So what we decided to try and do was to come up with a framework for building a curated collection of digital production grade assets. And we expect these to be able to be used for education, for training, for research, software and hardware development, performance benchmarking, and also just sort of publishability. The idea of being able to publish your results for research or for marketing to reference back to these production grade assets. It's probably worth talking about some non-goals, some problems that we're explicitly not trying to solve. So this is not really intended as a kind of a tutorial best practice example. Really what we want is things that came from real productions, and it's important to understand what those look like. And they're not pretty, and they are named funny things like Final 11, and have many different versions of things inside there. This is not a digital backlot. There are a lot of commercial folks out there and non-commercial ones making really interesting backlots of reusable assets. That's not something we're interested in. We're interested in a more tightly curated collection. And it's also, even though it's Academy Software Foundation, this is not about conformance tests or unit tests or stuff like that. The projects will handle this. This is we do hope that these assets get used by the projects in various ways like that, but that's not what we're setting out to do. So again, talking about the goals of what we were trying to achieve here, Eric had a really nice way of talking about this early on, and it was sort of make it easy, make it clear, and make it useful. And so I thought it would be useful to walk through those. The first one being easy. So this is the biggest challenge that we faced was coming up with a license. And so we have a single license that we'll touch on briefly and give you a pointer off to. And then the other thing was to make it so that the hosting of these assets would be handled by the Academy Software Foundation. And this wouldn't be something that the people who were contributing them would have to worry about, even if they're gigabytes of data. The next thing was clear. And the idea of clear was we started developing a wish list of things that both the community and the projects at the ASWF would want. We also wanted to develop clear curation criteria. Sorry for the alliteration, but the idea there being that it would be very clear to someone who was thinking about donating something, is this something that looks like it might end up in the Academy Software Foundation asset repo or not? And then finally, trying to develop this idea of sort of a seal of approval, this idea of what the community thinks of as a contemporary production grade asset. And this is probably something that would have to be revisited, maybe year to year, to try and make sure that things don't kind of bit rot their way into obscurity. That said, there's a lot of usefulness of keeping older things around, but that's the idea of like that maybe we would be marking some of these assets as like, actually, this represents the current state of the art of complexity for production work. And finally, useful. And so you can kind of break this down into two sorts of assets we're looking for. One of them would be kind of the warts and all production asset. And then the other ones are if you've developed something that's production grade, but it can be used across a lot of things. One could imagine a USD asset that had its materials in Material X. That could be very clean and portable across a bunch of renderers, and we'd love to have assets like that, because I think the community would be very excited by that. So I mentioned the legal agreement. Here's the URL, and there'll be a link off to how to find this stuff in a little bit here. Now, this was inspired specifically by Disney's Moana license, and we wanted to balance the needs of the contributors who are going to give us an asset to the consumers and the constraints that they would be under in terms of licensing agreements and stuff internal there. So you should definitely please make sure that you talk to your lawyers because they're going to be an important part of this. And I mentioned the wish list, and so here's the URL for that. Please feel free to add things to it. Some of the things that we might want. I'm sorry, I seem to be having a little bit of trouble getting the advancing on the slides here, so some of these are kind of coming in chunks. So 3D production scenes in USD we're really interested in. Video and audio that might be useful for Open Timeline IO. Open shading language, shaders at production level of complexity. Image sequences that are hard to compress, the kinds of things that would show up doing reviews on a feature film, large open VDB data sets, maybe assets from a produced short film. All of these are the kinds of things that we're looking for. The big news we have to share today, I guess, is that we're transitioning from a working group into an actual official Academy Software Foundation project. And so that means we need help. We'd love to get members' involvement from you in the Academy Software Foundation and the larger open source community to become involved in this. Both the people who are listening live and the people who hopefully are watching this later on recorded. We'd love to hear from you. We also have a few assets from some ASWF members. I'm not going to talk about those right now. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, but we're excited about what we're getting. But you should come join us. Come on the Slack. You can get to it via this link, slack.aswf.io, and then come over to the assets channel. That's where we're hanging out and chatting. And with that, I will transition over to see if there's any questions for Eric and I.
All right. Don't everybody jump up at once.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay. Okay, so we've got some good stuff over on the chat in terms of links for people. I do think that one of the, just to kind of have a little bit of a discussion before we get some questions, one of the things that we are really interested in having a discussion about is figuring out that way of what's an asset that we should accept. And so we've talked in the working group about if there's things coming in that are clearly relevant to an Academy Software Foundation project, like say some OSL shaders or some OpenEXR images, we would probably defer to the TSC of that project. Then there are other things like USD, which is not an Academy Software Foundation project, but is of a lot of interest to the community. That's something that probably the people in the TSC of this new project would probably weigh in, as well as people on the Technical Advisory Council for the ASWF.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Michael said, welcome participation. The next meeting 2 weeks from now will be canceled, and then so the next meeting is on Tuesday, September 30th, if I remember, August 30th.
Yeah.
And come on down. And yeah, if you're if you're a vendor to the film community, think about what kind of assets would really help you develop your software and prove out your software. You can always add that to the wish list, or talk about it on the mailing list or the Slack channel. If you are at a studio, think about a product you might get or a research paper you might get, and what's the data that you wish they had tested on? Like if they're testing on stuff that they can easily download today, maybe it's not up to the standards of complexity or the standards of just scale that you need. So think about what assets you wish they would test against, and whether you have anything that you could contribute to the community to make that happen.
Yeah, and it does feel like there is a real opportunity. I think we got a lot of buy-in from the governing board and their legal representation in terms of coming up with this license. And so I think we all feel really good about the ability for people to use it to both contribute assets as well as to be able to pull them in to their organization and use them.
So we had a question here. Doug was asking, do you want to try to make the assets work with each other? Like, should I be able to use Studio A's texture assets with Studio B's crowd assets easily?
It's a great question. I think, we hope that, USD being one example of where you could imagine layering on different supports for different renderers. If someone has something for their render, or a commercial render, say Blender or RenderMan, something that's available to a lot of people, we'd love to get that kind of stuff if we get USD ones. I think in a perfect world, we'd love to have people contributing like OpenEXR files that could end up in an Open Timeline IO kind of container, or being used by the some of the things that are being developed in the review and approval working group. So yeah, the more synergy we get between them, the better, I think, because it'll keep the assets fresh, and it'll make sure that people have a kind of shorthand to talk about some of these problem domains. I think Moana data set from Disney is a great example, right? Like everybody talks about that. It's a really great level of complexity to discuss, I think.
Yeah, mad props to Disney Animation and Nick Cannon for getting that out there. At the same time, if Studio C is contributing something, I don't think they have to worry about whether it works with the existing, thing from Studio A and thing from Studio B. It's, that's a second order or third order concern. The first thing is just, can we get some good stuff in there? Are there plans to submit the license to the OSI for certification as an open source license?
That's interesting.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know much about that.
I'm not familiar with that.
I mean, one thing is that this is not primarily code, right? I mean, there may be little snippets of code in there, shaders, whatever, but it's mostly data. So it's not exactly like the other open source projects under ASWF, but it's worth considering.
Yeah, that's a neat. That's not a avenue that I thought about. Since you can't, I would say show up at the next meeting.
In terms of ETA of coming assets, yeah.
Because I think the issue there is the fact that we were a working group, and a working group really doesn't have any power except to kind of recommend some things. So we've recommended some things. The TAC said, that sounds great. There should be a project doing that. And that project will meet next month or at the end of this month, I guess.
I think over the next couple months, next 2-3 months, I'm hoping to get something in there. Let's see.
I think
Um,
I think we're at time here.
I
It's
think we are at times. Time
3:20.
to pass it over to David. Thanks very
Yes.
much, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
We'll see you at the meetings.